It's a very strange story. Well, the headline is it's about a Nazi jazz band. That sounds very odd, and it's a very strange story. In the early days of World War II, when Lord Haw Haw was broadcasting from Germany to Britain, propaganda broadcasts, there was a jazz band called Charlie and His Orchestra, who basically did entertainment, who backed up what Lord Haw Haw was saying in propaganda, and they rewrote jazz standards, jazz songs with anti-Semitic lyrics, and I came across them. I came across this and thought this is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever heard, and there's definitely a story in this somewhere. Funnily enough, I was initially came across Charlie and His Orchestra when I was book reviewing for a newspaper in Glasgow, which is where I'm from, and I came across this book about German propaganda radio, and I never reviewed it for the paper, but I just stole the book out of the cupboard, and it had recordings on a CD in the back of Charlie and His Orchestra, and this is the really strange thing, is this was a great jazz band. These are a really good jazz band who were forbidden from playing the music they loved in Nazi Germany. And they made this kind of bargain, and it's a little bit like Faustus, making this bargain with the Nazis, that we get to play this music, but the only way we get to play this music is by playing it for the Nazis. So it's this very strange, because the Nazis hated jazz. They hated every kind of modern culture. They hated modern art, they hated jazz, because they thought it was decadent, they thought it was racially impure, they loathed it. But yet they paid for this jazz band, and that paradox, that strangeness, struck me as, well, it's like it's like Cabaret. What the characters in Cabaret did next, the ones who didn't leave, the ones who stayed. I mean, in a way, it's like that's who these people are. That they were the people who were performing in cabarets in Berlin in the 20s, when that was that fantastic cabaret culture, and this is what they did next. This is them in a few years later in 1939. Doing this propaganda jazz. It's always very nerve-wracking to hear your work back for the first time, but it's really useful. But at an early stage, quite a long time before we actually put the show on, because it means you get to hear what sings and what doesn't. I suppose in jazz terms, you get to hear what swings. And you kind of say, well, okay, that's good, that's not so good, we'll keep that, we'll lose that. And again, with people watching it from the theatre, we're able to make comments about it and just to get a first response. Because the trouble is, when you get really close to a piece of work like this, especially because it's researching it, and because everything in the play, there's even a stand-up comedy routine, which is based on jokes that were done in Berlin at the time, and forbidden jokes. But the idea that we have a stand-up comedian doing these jokes in public as an act of almost public suicide, and so there's all kinds of wonderful, extraordinary things in it. But to test them with actors, test them in front of even a small audience, is really useful.